All right, we're live.
Hey, everyone.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to our Wednesday deep dive. This is our first one after taking a few weeks off. We had a couple weeks break
for your birthday.
For my birthday, yeah. It's my last year of my 20s. I'm 29 now, so you know, taking advantage of it. If this is your first time tuning in, though, we're super stoked that you decided to join us this Wednesday. This is a deep dive that we usually do every Wednesday. We do it as sort of like a podcast live stream combo conversation thing that we do, where we try to take a look at the different passages that we've been talking about in our Sunday sermons. We go a little bit deeper in them, hence the name. And we also just try to talk about maybe some topics that are related, but we just didn't get a chance to get to them in the Sunday sermon. And today we have a really fun one.
I feel like you got to be in the right mood, though. You got to be angry, right?
Right.
So, as I'm drinking my tea, very British-like, calmly, in my nice couch.
Calmly drinking our chai tea right here, but...
Yeah, we are going to be talking about the passage in Matthew chapter 5. We've been working through the Sermon on the Mount. That's been a really edifying series for me. You've done most of the preaching through the series, and it's been cool. So we're going to do kind of like a catch up for this deep dive, because we, like you said, didn't have a deep dive last week, so we're going to kind of focus on some of the both your sermon from this week and last week's, and kind of do like 2 for 1, kill 2 birds with 1 stone. You know, like I don't know if anyone's ever done that in the world, but please, like, tell me if you've ever actually.
Where does that saying come from?
Kill 2 birds with 1 stone, because I'd be really impressed. but we're doing it today.
That's what we're going to try to, at least. Yeah, so if you haven't been tuning into our Sunday sermons, like Noah said, we've been going through the Sermon on the Mount. 2 Sundays ago, I preached on a passage where Jesus addresses anger, and he makes an interesting connection between anger and murder. And then this last Sunday, I talked especially about how important it is to Jesus that we have a right relationship with our brothers and the people around us. Before we try to go before God and offer gifts at the altar and worship him. And my point was kind of that sacred secular divide that tends to be really popular for us may not be as much of a thing as we think that it is. So today we kind of wanted to sort of preemptively talk about maybe some pushback that some people might have to a few of the points that I made, some things that we might want to nuance a little bit more. Sometimes, you get up there, you start preaching, you get really into it, and it might sound like you're saying a really extreme version of one thing, and we might need a little nuance, so we want to do that today. But before we get into any of that, we do want to start out with our quirky queries, we call them. We've been using this as an opportunity for anybody that's been tuning in to get to know both me and Noah better, and different guests that we might have on the show. So we've been asking ourselves just kind of weird off-the-wall questions. Quirky queries is the name Noah came up with.
Yep.
So that you guys get to know us better, and the cool thing is we've been using it to get to know each other better. So you get to be along for the ride as we find out interesting things about each other and our backstories and all that kind of stuff. So, Noah, you said you had a fun one for us today.
I've got a fun one. This one almost should be called a nerdy query. So I'm going to have to explain a little bit of it, because I'm not sure how much of it you know. But the question is derived from a game that many of you might know called D&D. And
Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes, Dungeons and Dragons. And in that game, you play as these make-believe characters, and part of rolling your character is coming up with stats for your character. There are 6 stats. There's strength. There is intelligence. I'm thinking agility, but it's not agility. It's we'll just say it's agility for the time being, but I know it's something different. And strength, agility, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma are the stats. And basically... Dexterity, that's it.
Dexterity.
Thank you. Yeah, dexterity.
I've got an iPad in front of me to pull up things exactly like this. So.
All the D&D fans are going to be against me right
Strength,
now.
intelligence, wisdom, dexterity, constitution, and charisma.
Yes,
is what it says
charisma.
here.
Yeah. And the fun question, I've actually asked this question of nerd people before, is if you were to take your personality and give yourself stats based off of that, what would you give yourself? And I'll kind of teach you a little bit of the stats.
Right.
So an 8 is like a -1. So you're going to always roll things based off of a strength. If you had like 8, you would roll things that would give you a -1 on all the dice that you roll that are like strength checks. So if you're trying to like lift a block or whatever and you have 8 in strength, right, you're gonna -1 off the die roll that you roll. A 16 is like a +3. They go in increments of 2. So
All right, I'm already lost.
okay,
What does that mean?
Okay, so like 10 is 0, right?
Okay.
12 is a +1. If your stat and strength was 12, it's a +1. If your stat is 14, it's a +2. And if your stat is 16, it's a +3. And if your stat is like 18, it's a +4. So it's an increments of 2. Do you see what I'm saying?
Uh-huh.
It's like, so 8, we'll say for the purposes of this, it's 8 through 18 is what you can give each of your stats. Okay. So if you're fully awful at strength, give yourself an 8. If you're amazing at strength, give yourself an 18. And in the middle, just do it by increments of 2. And do that for each of your stats. So you've got strength. Mm-hmm. How strong are you? Do you think dexterity? How dexterous do you think you are? Constitution. How much constitution do you think you have? Like health. Wisdom. How wise do you think you are? Intelligence. How intelligent do you think you are? And charisma. How charismatic do you think you are? So you think you got it?
Do you have to? Do they like add up to a certain number or?
No. It's just literally I'm giving you from 8 to 18 on the stat thing. We're going to pick from 8 to 18 what you are.
Okay.
So, and only go with even. I mean, you can go odd, but yeah, go for evens.
That's an interesting question.
Mm-hmm. It's fun, actually. I think it's one, we get to know about your personality, what you think you are, and for the nerds out there, they can now go play Nick in a D&D campaign.
Okay, so strength is one of the lower ones.
Okay.
I don't know that I'm like at the worst, but maybe just a step above the worst.
Okay, so we'll put you at a 10 then. That'll be every die roll that you roll for strength things, you would have a +0 to.
Probably same with constitution, like your overall health, right?
Overall health.
I don't know how you define that, but I don't consider myself a very healthy person. And part of the problem is, like I've talked about before, I'm kind of a hypochondriac. So even if I am healthy, I don't feel healthy because in my head, I'm convinced that I'm still sick.
That might be like Constitution saving throws are always at disadvantage, but that's amazing. So yeah, we'll go with 10 in strength and 10 in Constitution. All right.
I try to be really charismatic.
Okay. I think
that's definitely something that's like important to me. Mm-hmm. Like I want to be good at that. I want to be like well liked by people and be able to win people over. But as far as like whether I'm actually good at that or not,
I think you are. I think you are. You're pretty charismatic.
So maybe higher on that one.
I'd put you at a 16 on that one.
Okay.
Like 18's like the best.
Right.
So you're like one above the best. Yeah.
Intelligence, wisdom. What's the difference in those in D&D?
So in D&D, wisdom is for like perception and persuasion, and like anything that has to do with like being able to like influence people and to kind of pick up on what people are saying, you know. And then intelligence is like for like observing the room. Think Sherlock Holmes, you know. And so more intelligence is like a Sherlock Holmes ability, and then wisdom is more like able to read people and situations.
Right. So if you're like oblivious to things a lot, does that mean you wouldn't have very high intelligence?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Then I don't have very high intelligence. I try to be perceptive, but there's definitely a lot of things that just
Well, I will say that, like, you know, you have a good eye for, like, visual stuff. Like, you can look around this room and then you've designed it. So I give you a point for that.
Okay. I'm not going to put myself, like, at the very bottom.
Yeah.
We'll put myself just somewhere in the middle.
Let's give you a 12. How's that? Yeah, that's like +1.
So let's say 12 there. Dexterity.
Yeah, how good are you at dodgeball?
Horrible. Yeah, like agility, any of that kind of stuff. Same with strength. Not.
Okay,
yeah.
we'll give you an 8 on that.
Give me an 8 on that one too. And then I do try. I would consider myself to be someone who tries to be wise. Isn't that like wisdom? Like trying to make sure that I'm persuasive and winning people over and different things like that. That is kind of connected to the charisma for me. But also, I would also just take that as like, I also sometimes connect wise with like age. And people have always told me that I'm like a 45-year-old man in a 29-year-old man's body. So
it's true.
I think that's their not so nice way of saying you're wiser than you seem for your age.
All right, so you 16 or 18 in wisdom?
No, not 18.
Not 18?
We'll say 16.
Okay, so based off of that, the stats that you ranked yourself high as, the character that you should play with those stats, you should play a bard.
A bard?
Because bards are high in charisma and wisdom.
What is a bard? I don't even know what that word means.
Basically, they're like musicians. They're like,
sweet.
Yeah.
I'm down.
And they like go out and like they have like magical capabilities, but they also have like high. The reason they have high charisma is they like will do a lot of musical persuasions and can do like drama and theater and things like that. So yeah.
Okay.
Sounds great. You're a medieval musician.
That sounds great to me. I'll take it.
So I figured that would be a fun nerdy one to do.
We should say this. We'll do the same thing next week for you.
Okay.
I want you to. Okay. Let's keep that in mind. But we do have a lot we want to get into today, so we should just jump right in. So, like we mentioned, we're kind of combining 2 weeks into one. The first sermon I preached a couple weeks ago was on the passage in the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus makes an interesting connection between anger and murder. And he says, he has this set of lines he uses all the time in the Sermon on the Mount. You have heard it said, but I say to you. So he's saying, first, let me say the statement that we all agree on, the part from the law of Moses that we are all super in agreement with. And now let me tell you what I'm saying to you. The you have heard it said was that a murderer should be subject to judgment, which we're all like, yeah, of course. Murderers, we're all for judging murderers. Everybody's down for that. Even people who are like, don't judge, we're going to judge murderers. And he says, but I say to you, if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be subject to judgment. And so he makes this really strong case for anger as something that just should be treated as something to be subject to judgment, same as murder, same as all those other kind of things. And that was the case I tried to make in the sermon. I tried to make a pretty sweeping case for just the fact that, like, I don't know that we need to be angry. I think just that, especially as Christians, we should not be angry. But it was kind of funny because I've preached a version of that sermon several times.
Right.
I have had a chance to visit other churches and fill in at different churches, and I've preached on that passage a lot because that's something that's always really important to me. It has been really important to me. I think I see just kind of an epidemic of anger amongst Christians, and that is something that I think is a problem, and I want to address it. So I've preached on that passage a lot. And without fail, every time I preach on that passage, I'd go out to lunch afterwards with a few people from the church, or I would go talk to somebody else, and people would always be like, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I mean, like, but what about A, B, and C? And so what I spent basically half the sermon doing that Sunday was just like preemptively addressing some of those A, B, and C things that I used to hear all the time. Because my frustration is that you see this with a lot of Jesus's commands. Jesus will command something. Jesus will tell us to do something. And Christians are really, really good about figuring out ways in explaining how, well, Jesus wasn't really talking to me, or he wasn't really talking about this situation. And that's a frustration of mine. So I kind of wanted to sort of preemptively deal with that. So what's super funny is I show up to work today and we're talking about what we're going to talk about, and then Noah's like, yeah, but like, what about A, B, and C? So you brought up some good ideas, though. I figured we should let's talk about them in real time. What about a few other situations? Is it really as sweeping as I made it sound? Is it really just no Christians should ever be angry, or are there some situations where it would be okay, where it would be allowable?
Yeah,
to be angry.
Because I mean, I get that you were definitely targeting towards that audience that's always doing the "what about A, B, and C." And I think I want to start this off first with actually a question that you didn't get to talk about in your sermon that I would like to hear you talk about a little bit, is having that perspective that you preached from your sermon. Do you still have a category for righteous anger, and what falls into that category? You know, or is just all anger off the table for you?
It's kind of a flavor of the moment type thing for me. It depends on when you ask me as to whether I feel like I would or I wouldn't. The first few times I preached some version of this sermon at other churches and stuff like that, I think I just was pretty adamantly like, no, I don't have any category for human righteous anger. I did have a category for godly righteous anger. Yeah. Like, I think it's clear from the Bible that God gets angry about certain things. Right. But I was just like, but he's God, and that is still, that's not wrong for him, necessarily. But initially I had no categories for human righteous anger. I was just like, no, that's not our place. That's not our job. We don't judge. We shouldn't be angry. I am softening on that a little bit. Recently, and I do think that there is probably a space for human righteous anger, but I do think a lot of things that end up passing as righteous anger aren't as righteous as people would think that they are, and so I have space for it, I have room for it, but I would say it's super rare, and I would have a hard time finding good examples of it, even in my own experience. Part of the reason I've softened on it, you kind of mentioned this verse earlier when we were talking before we went on live, but there's a very famous verse in Galatians where the Apostle Paul is talking about people who are requiring Gentiles to be circumcised and to follow the law of Moses and all kinds of various different things like that. The term in Christian circles for those people, they call them Judaizers, who are trying to take Christians and Judaize them, make them fully subservient to Torah. And Paul's super upset about that. You can see that clearly in Galatians. He thinks that's a big problem. He thinks that is not right. And he, at one point, is talking about the people who want to be circumcised. And it's kind of a joke. It's a mean-spirited joke, and it's definitely very angry. And he says, I wish they would not just cut off their foreskin, but just go ahead and cut off the whole thing. Emasculate themselves is how most translations like to put it really nice, and they just use this word nobody ever uses, emasculate themselves. But you can tell from the Greek, he's just saying, I wish that knife that they're using for the circumcision would just, scoot a little further down and just go on and cut the whole thing off. And so it's pretty clear that he has like some anger for those people and for what they are representing. And honestly, the more I've studied the life of Paul, the more I've seen what I would call righteous anger over and over and over again in Paul. Yeah. It's obvious that Paul was like super passionate always. Yeah. And so you can see some categories though, and some room for righteous anger. So I have room for it. But I'm skeptical still of most people who would even claim righteous anger.
I feel that. I think probably the most severe example I could give you of someone that I would say got angry and it resulted in things going really wrong is the story of Ananias and Sapphira and Peter. Like that's a case where you can tell that Peter gets angry And you don't really know how much of that was like Peter, how much of that was the Spirit, but Peter apparently felt it necessary to prophesy their death and then them die in that story. And the church is greatly afraid of Peter after that story, but you don't see any real condemnation of Peter doing that, I think that a lot of people still have problems with that passage in particular, because it's a difficult one. Like even today, it's a hard one to wrap your head around. Like, imagine your pastor like becoming so not okay with how you handled a situation that they pronounced your death. It just seems very odd for our time and our place to do. But I don't know. Have you dialogued with that passage at all? And what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think my difficulty is most of the passages people use to defend anger. They'll be like, here's an example of somebody getting angry. Is that the passages never actually say that the person
got
is
angry? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there's a lot of
ambiguity,
assumption on our part.
Yeah.
Like it kind of makes sense that they might be angry there. We can kind of imagine that they might be angry. But the thing I've noticed lots of times is that there's often a confusion between violence and anger, because there's such thing as violence without anger. I would argue.
Yeah.
It may be rare in our experience, but I mean, I think violence would be, doing harm to somebody dying, somebody having their money changing tables flipped over in the temple, things like that. They're passionate, they're violent, but anger is a particular emotion to me that accompanies a lot of that kind of stuff. And the big point I was trying to make, that I made in the sermon, was just that what often happens with anger is that we lose control. And I tried to mention that in the sermon. How many times have you been angry and you've said something that you don't mean?
You didn't mean to say.
Or that maybe you did, but you've had enough self-control in the past to not say it.
Yeah.
As soon as you get angry, all that self-control goes out the door. You say whatever's on your mind. You say whatever's going to take to hurt the other person the most. And so you do a lot of really harmful things under anger, because you're just kind of losing control under anger. Whereas I think there are examples of sort of like controlled violence that does not have that same sort of out of control component to it that I often see with a lot of people who are angry. And so there's a passage in Ephesians that I've also used to preach on when I preached on anger before. I may just go ahead and pull it up. It'll be a little bit easier. It's actually the one that I originally thought of whenever I thought of a lot of these issues that have to do with anger, because my home church where I grew up, they had one Sunday where the pastor wasn't there. He was on vacation. And so one of the elders preached that Sunday. He's one of the guys that kind of is one of the leaders in the church, and he is this super awesome guy named Mike Lee. Love Mike Lee. He's super cool. One of my biggest inspirations. I love how he lives his life. I love everything that he represents. And he preached a sermon basically saying that he doesn't think Christians should ever get angry. And he was one of the best people to preach that sermon, just because he is like a living embodiment of it. He is just the most peaceful, gracious, happy, like everything. So much so that everyone there at the church loves him. They're just everyone at our church at Eastwind is convinced Mike Lee is like, you got Jesus, you got Mike Lee. Maybe the rest of us are somewhere down here.
Yeah.
He practices what he preached. He walks the walk. He talks the talk. He's an awesome guy. I really do respect him a lot. And so coming from him, it was just like really impactful to hear him say that. And he used this particular passage in Ephesians to kind of make his case. Yeah. And so it's Ephesians, it's in chapter 4, and there's two different verses he referenced in it. They're kind of a few verses away from each other. But the first one he referenced is Ephesians chapter 4, verse 31, where the Apostle Paul, he's writing to the church in Ephesus, and he says, "Get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice." So, and he follows it up, "Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other just as in Christ God forgave you." And so that felt pretty all-encompassing, and he preached it that way. He said it says all bitterness, all rage, all anger, all brawling, all slander. It's like Paul is like, I'm going to make sure nobody tries to weasel out of this. I'm going to give you every possible word people could use for angry moments. But even in the sermon, he did have to preface it with a few verses before that. In verse 26, Paul says, "In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold." So there is, even in that one section, I think, a little bit of a room for an assumption from Paul that you're going to get angry.
Right.
It's a natural human emotion, all that kind of stuff. But I've really started to try to take to heart what he's saying, which is, in your anger, do not sin. And I just think there are very few of us who can truthfully say that when we are angry, we do not sin. And so until you can say that you can be angry and not sin, until you have examples of that in your life and you feel like God has grown you to that maturity, I think it's kind of just safer to avoid the anger as much as possible.
What would that look like to you, for someone to be angry but not sin?
I don't know. That's a good question. I think it would mean that you would not try to hurt people. One of the biggest issues I've seen with when people try to enact justice, when vigilantes get out there and try to bring things into their own hand, or when they try to make things right on their own, when things aren't fair and we get angry and we try to make things right on our own. One of our biggest things is that I think we sort of go above and beyond in the punishment. So if someone does one thing, it's not an eye for an eye thing. It's like you poke someone's eye out, they want to come back and break both your legs, take both your eyes, slash your face open. It's like we're always one-upping each other. Escalation, absolutely.
We say that all the time. It's like, well, that escalated quickly.
Absolutely. So I definitely think someone who's angry but not sinning would not be in that sort of escalating of tensions mentality. And the biggest thing, I think, would just be having some semblance of control, self-control over their mouth, especially what they're going to say. So if you can control what you're going to say in your anger, and over their, just like actions, like are you going to angrily grab somebody and push them up against the wall, strangle them, whatever crazy things you might want to do. I've actually kind of been connecting it a lot recently in my mind, similarly to when people talk about drunkenness. It's kind of interesting because most people would say that Christians believe that drunkenness is wrong, is sinful. But what's been really interesting to me is whenever I try to ask Christians, why do you think drunkenness is wrong? There's not like a lot of answers. A lot of people be like, I don't know, it's a sin. The Bible says it's a sin, so it's wrong. But what I really noticed with almost all sins in the Bible is that there's just like a clear logic to why they are sins. To why they are harmful to human beings. So the question is, what's the deal with drunkenness? Why would that be sinful? And what I found lots of times is just that one of the ways that drunkenness becomes a problem, I've thought about this a lot, so there's a million different reasons, but one of the ways it becomes a problem is because there's a lot of loss of self-control in drunkenness. People will do things when they're drunk that they would not do otherwise.
Yeah.
And I meet a lot of people who will try to argue with me otherwise. They'll be like, "Oh no, I'm perfectly controlled when I'm drunk." But as the person who usually has to be the sober one around them, let me assure you, your self-perception of how much control you have versus how much control you actually have is not what you think it is.
Yep.
So if you're the one that's telling me I'm perfectly in control when I'm drunk, I just don't believe that. Like, people just have you don't have any idea how much control you actually do or don't have in your drunkenness. And one of the biggest issues with drunkenness is just that it removes your inhibitions, removes a lot of the control that you might have over your actions, over your thoughts, over your ability to decide what is the best decision in the current situation. I've started to see a strong connection between drunkenness and anger. And we sometimes even in books and stuff like that, they'll use language of like he was like drunk with power, or drunk with anger, or something like that. And there's a similar just like blackout angry that people can get. So you can get blackout drunk. I've seen people just like blackout angry. And I think that they just don't fulfill Paul's command in that Ephesians passage. They can't in good conscience say that in their anger they did not sin. And so in the same way that like an alcoholic understands they can't control themselves with alcohol, so they just have to avoid it, I think it would be wise for more Christians to treat anger similarly. So that's why in the sermon I tried to make an interesting connection with some studies that have been done about the like neurology of anger and how you really can become addicted to anger in the same way that a lot of people can become addicted to drugs or alcohol. And so if that's what it's doing to you, then be extra careful about it. And so I'm not in a place anymore where I'm saying you should never be angry, but in the same way that you should know that alcohol has a possibility of causing problems and you need to be careful how much you drink and what you do when you do drink, I just think anger should be treated the same.
Similarly. And that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. I think the thing that you addressed mostly that I thought was... you might have mentioned this, or this might have been someone else that mentioned this, but I think you said in your sermon that like there are Christian ways to release your anger that are healthy, right? And because in the Psalms you have a lot of Psalms that the writers of these Psalms are obviously angry, like they actually come out and say, like, I want these people dead, or, like, avenge me, God. Like they are not writing these Psalms from a position in which they are, calmly at peace and just with the world. And, there are many Psalms that David writes where he is full on wanting God to just kill his enemies.
I did mention them in the sermon. They call imprecatory Psalms.
Imprecatory Psalms, yeah. And I think you said in the sermon that like the way to sort of juggle that with what you're saying is to kind of allow God to be the vehicle for your anger, right? So take your feelings and emotions that you're naturally going to have, and instead of directing them to the person, instead you direct those to God, who will then take care of that for you, right? Because I feel like someone could hear that in kind of white evangelical circles and then tell people that are being oppressed that, hey, you shouldn't be angry about this. You shouldn't protest. You shouldn't you shouldn't do anything of that regard at all. You should be these calm people and just the brutality that's happening in your life, and you just be calm and let God take care of it all. What would be your response to someone that would be like that? Like, do you think that that's biblical, or do you feel like there is a little bit of a wiggle room where we are allowed to be righteously indignant of injustices in our world?
Yeah. No, I do think I've found that bottling up your anger is not the solution. Yeah. So that's just not healthy. And that's why I think one of the best things we can do is to follow the examples of the psalmists and express to God how angry we are with people. And I've found that to be just like, sometimes people just need somewhere to vent. A lot of people say that. I just need to vent to God. Like that's definitely been one of my biggest encouragements. But I think my actual answer, if someone were to, because this is something that comes up a lot when talking about issues of oppression, people who feel that they are being oppressed because of their race, because of their gender, because of their poverty level, all kinds of different things like that. It has been a common thread for Christians to weaponize some of these passages and be like, hey, you're in sin because you're angry about it. You should just accept what's going on in your life. And my answer to them would be to read the very next verses that Jesus brings up right after he finishes talking about anger, which is the verses I preached on last Sunday, which are about going to give a gift at the altar. And he says, if you go to give a gift at the altar, you're going to go worship God, give him a gift, present it in the temple, and you, in the moment, remember that your brother has something against you. Go and be reconciled to them, fix the injustice, then come back and give your gift at the altar. And the point I made, which is that most of my life when I had heard that verse preached, it was interpreted like, if someone hurt you somehow, you need to go and forgive them before you come to church.
Yeah.
But if you look clearly, it's not if someone hurt you. It's if you hurt somebody else. You need to go and be reconciled to them. And so very clearly, Jesus is saying, don't get angry with brothers or sisters. It's not healthy for you. You're not going to be in a good place for it. It could lead you to a place of being like a murderer. But if you're the kind of person who's going around giving people other reasons to be angry, you need to get that fixed, because God's not going to stand for that. God does not want you to show up and give him gifts while you're going around oppressing, hurting, pushing down other people around you. What I have found is that the onus of fixing injustice falls on the oppressor lots of times in the scriptures. They're going to get what's coming to them. They're going to get the judgment. A lot of times God's judgment to the people of Israel is because they are the oppressors. They're not they're oppressing slaves. They're not helping the widows and orphans. They're not helping. And so God's telling them, I even used a verse from Isaiah where God's just like, I'm so tired of your festivals. I'm so tired of all your worship and all your songs and all your everything else. Because you guys are going around trampling on other people, oppressing them, giving up their rights, and giving them reasons to be angry. And so I think that one of the best things we can do before we go up to somebody and say, you shouldn't be angry about this, is ask ourselves, are we wrong somehow?
Are we the
reason they're angry?
angry?
And I think if a lot of those Christians that went around telling people, you shouldn't be angry, this is a sin, would ask themselves where they are the ones who are maybe causing some of this anger, they would find that they are often the reason those people are upset. It's similar to a different command from Paul later, I think in Ephesians as well, where he tells parents not to exasperate their children.
Yeah.
It's something that does not, children honor your parents gets preached all the time in every church, but I have never heard a preacher preach on parents do not exasperate your children.
Yeah.
I know from experience that a big source of anger for a lot of children out there is their parents. And there's good and wrong reasons for that, but sometimes parents are not following that command and they are exasperating their children. They are bringing their children to anger. And so I think we could probably deal with those particular issues, but I think the healthiest thing to deal with and the most important thing for us to be looking at is just like, where are we maybe the source of anger for other people? Where are we the people who are maybe causing other people to be upset? I've talked about this a lot with my dad, as we've had a few different conversations before about political correctness, because there's kind of a common thread amongst, I would just say, older evangelicals, that they just say, I don't care about any of this PC crap. I don't want to be politically correct. I just want to say what's on my mind.
Yeah.
And I get their frustrations and their exasperations and some of that. But I really think there's something wrong if Christians are going around purposely using words that they know are going to trigger other people.
Yeah.
And purposely going around and using words that they know are going to make other people angry.
Yeah.
There's kind of a trend in it I don't know. Sometimes it sounds like I'm really, really hard, especially on conservatives politically.
Yeah.
But I think it's just because that's the circles I grew up in, and those a lot of the people who claim to be Christians. So that's why I'm like going to be extra hard there.
And I would say, like, there's a passage that says you discipline those you love, you know?
Absolutely.
And so I feel like your heart is, you love that.
Yeah.
You have not just like, you think they're you love that group, like
Absolutely.
you have a heart for that group in particular, and it's natural that when you have a heart for someone and they don't seem to be living the way that you want them to live, that you're going to be more critical of it.
And so all of that to say, I'm about to criticize conservatives here, but I mean it lovingly. But there's definitely been a trend I have seen amongst political conservatives where they purposely are trying to anger liberals. You know, they're trying to trigger people, and they think it's fun. You know, there's a whole series of like YouTube videos I've seen of just these conservatives that go out on the street with microphones,
JP Sears,
and they are doing everything in their power to make other people angry. And conservatives love to laugh about it, and they're just like, oh, ha, 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 look at these liberals getting all triggered. I love it. It's so funny. I think we really need to take a step back and be like, are we being Christ-like in that way? Christ definitely had some moments where he was like, where people were getting real upset at him. You know, the Pharisees got very angry with Jesus lots of times, so much so that they sought to have him killed, you know? So I'm not saying you should you're never going to make other people angry, because I especially think just living a Christian life is going to make other people angry sometimes. But if you're purposely going out there to try to make people angry, I just think you need to take a step back and really ask yourself, is what I'm doing correct in this moment? And so I think that's just been kind of the general feel that I've had across the board for these particular issues. Yeah. And I did really want to bring up that that study about the neuroscience and how people are addicted to anger and just various different things like that. Just because I have recently felt extra helpless in most of the conservative Christian circles that I run in, where I feel like I feel like the sober person in a room full of drunks. Yeah. I feel like I am just sitting here trying to maintain some semblance of peace and calm in my life, trying to have mercy for other people, trying to have grace and love, and trying to just understand where they're coming from. Yeah. And I feel like I'm just surrounded by just rage and anger, and can you believe the things the liberals are doing? Can you believe the newest thing that just happened in Congress? Can you believe this, that, and the other? And my whole point in it, because the study they did was based mostly around news outlets, is that I think news outlets know that anger is addictive. They're like drug pushers. You know, they're like drug dealers. They are selling a very addictive substance, and they know that they are. And I think there's just a lot of people, Christians especially out there, who are just mindlessly consuming this drug and not approaching it with kind of the restraint and wisdom.
Well, and I love your point that like actual substance abuse and like being angry all the time are almost synonymous, because you tend to hang out a lot in conservative circles, and I tend to have a lot of hang out a lot more in liberal circles, and so I get to see a lot of how liberals respond to anger, and I have yet seen a liberal case where they get angry and it does not immediately lead to abusing some type of substance. Like most of my friends that get angry about something politically, inevitably will end up drinking alcohol, will end up using drugs in some shape or form. There's just it's a pattern that I'm seeing in many of my liberal friends' lives where when they get angry, they don't have ways to properly deal with that. And so they then turn to substances to kind of calm that anger and sort of get back to that peaceful position, you know? And yeah, it's just, it's a worry that I have for people in my life that are, in that, but it's just, I think you're dead on in seeing the similarities between the two, because I think they're both kind of are the same in a lot of ways. And so you have two different groups of people that are both finding their own ways to become addicted to these things, and they can't communicate with one another. They can't love each other. And yeah, it just ends badly and poorly. So I resonate with that a lot.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, I've just slowly started to see that connection more and more. So
yeah. And I think kind of because I grew up in a home where like the very emotional kind of side to life was not necessarily encouraged, and you don't really like. I grew up in a very logical minded home where you took control over your emotions, right. And
I would say I did too.
Yeah,
that's definitely a big thing that they were like, I used to be the person that was just like, emotions are bad. People who are emotional are a problem. That was kind of the attitude I used to take lots of times.
And that was definitely, it was never spoken out loud, but that was definitely kind of the thought was emotions are uncontrollable, they're volatile, we don't know, that means conflict, we don't know how to deal with that, and I have since learned in my adult life that there is spaces where you can exist in friendship with with a person and feel even angry thoughts about a situation, and that friend lets you expulge that kind of bitterness, and there's kind of this camaraderie that happens just from that friend being there and listening to you sort of say these things that have really weighed on you and weighed on your heart. And I think that's another healthy way in which you're not directing your anger at a person, you're directing it at a situation, and you're sharing that emotionally with someone, and that person gets to sit with you in that space and sort of listen, and oftentimes they don't need to even say anything, they just need to listen. I think the problem becomes when you become the type of person that's all you do. Like where I have known people in my life that legitimately every conversation I had with them, they were angry about something or bitter about something, and it was like, are you even happy as a person? Like, like you ask that question because like they are never, they never seem to have moments of happiness, and they only have things that they're angry about. And I think that's when you sort of swerve into this, this is not a thing that just happened in your life that caused this emotion, but no, this is a character trait. Like you aren't just angry, you are an angry person, and it's a shifting from that to that I think is really detrimental, and it's probably the most dangerous thing, because when you hit that point, very few people recognize that they've got there. It's like they've had too much of the drug to realize that they're no longer sober, and so, the people I have in mind that were that way, trying to be gender neutral here and not name anybody, but the people that I have in mind that are that way are completely and totally oblivious to the fact that they live their life that way, and so it's a very blinding kind of addiction, I guess I'll say.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the other reason that making that connection between like substance abuse and anger and things like that is helpful is because at least like with alcohol, I know some people who just like don't ever drink because they're so afraid of the
long-term consequences.
Yeah. Or they're just, like, nah, I don't even want to get close to the line or something like that. But when I have done some studies on alcohol specifically, especially in the Old Testament, it's overwhelmingly positive. Like, there's more positive verses about alcohol than there are negative verses in the Old Testament. Because there's just kind of this like joy and merriment and togetherness and community and all this kind of stuff that kind of comes together with it. And so I found that in moderation, there really is something useful that comes from being able to sit down with a friend and have a drink and, talk over issues that we've got going on. And there's something, good in that moderate consumption of alcohol. And to just completely eliminate it from your life, though I think it's fine if you want to do that. But you may be missing out on a few things, You may be missing out on a little bit of some of the good things that it could kind of bring into your life. I think anger can be a similar thing, where in moderation,
it can be
helpful. It can be like a good thing. And so I have seen that a little bit because there's a few people in my life. I guess I can mention one by name because this guy, here at this, he used to work here at the college, Brent Lynn. Super chill guy. Always got a smile on his face. Anyone who knows Brent, super happy, super chill. Never angry. I rarely ever saw him angry. But I remember I was talking to a friend of mine who was a student here at the school who had the misfortune of making Brent angry one time. They did something that made him very upset. And I remember they came and they talked to me and they were like, it was terrifying. Like, I never want to see Brent angry again. But they took it really hard and they were like, I'm never going to do that again. I really hurt him. I'm so sorry that I did that. I'm going to take that to heart and I'm going to make sure that I do not ever make him angry again. And I think that's an example of someone who is not defined by anger, not addicted to anger. In moderation, though, it really got his point across. The few times he did get angry, it got his point across. And I think that's probably what I would more encourage people to do, especially Christians. I think Christians are starting to be known as angry people. I think we're kind of in the addicted to anger. We're angerholics right now. So it's just not having the effect that it used to have. People see Christians doing protests out in the streets for abortion issues or whatever they have on their mind, and it's easy for people to just be like, that's just evangelicals being angry about something again, as they always are, and stuff like that. And I do really think it just kind of loses its power if you're angry about everything. You're never angry appropriately. We titled this episode "Hulk Smash?" which was a title that Noah came up with. And there's this really famous line people quote all the time from the Avengers movies with Hulk, because there's this moment where he finally gets control over his anger. Because again, there's obviously a line between losing control and anger that everyone can see. Because that's the whole thing about Hulk, is he just like gets angry, loses control, turns into the Hulk. And so there's this moment where he can suddenly like control whether he turns into the Hulk or not. And they're trying to figure out why. They're like, what's your secret? And there's this just funny scene at the end where close to the end of the movie, where he's like, that's my secret. I'm always angry. That's what he says. Which is a funny line. It's really funny. People quote it all the time. But I just don't think it's true. I think that's actually the opposite of what happens. If you are always angry, I think you progressively lose more and more control. I think the only way that you become a person who is in control is if you learn to control your anger.
Yeah,
Bring it in
I think
moderation.
they're trying to communicate that, like, if you're always angry, you're not angry. You know, it's like if everything's blue, then nothing's blue. Yeah, it's that kind of argument. But
Yep, and I just don't think that's a
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, yeah.
I think anger is never satisfied.
yeah, no,
It's never,
it always
it's
wants
never
more.
enough. It always wants more.
Mhm.
It always grows and gets worse and worse and worse. So I just think we're just being too reckless and cavalier about our use of anger. And that's why I really do think one of the best things we can do is if I have some friends that struggle with alcohol abuse. So I do not drink around them. I do not take them to places where people are going to be drinking. I do not try to take them to bars. I do not try to, because I know that they are, that's something they're trying to deal with, maybe they are just trying to get over that. So I try to be considerate of others. I try to love my neighbor by not bringing them into situations where they can be more tempted to that. And that's where I don't think it's a coincidence that these two verses I talked about go right back to back.
Right.
Which is like, don't be angry. And then the follow-up verse is, if you have hurt somebody, if you're the one that has wronged somebody, go and fix it.
Yeah.
Because I really think that Christians need to have that kind of same attitude of like, there's a lot of people around me that are really addicted to anger right now. They are angerholics, just like my friends are alcoholics. So if you're being nice to somebody who is trying to be sober after having been an alcoholic, you don't drink around them. If there are people around us that are addicted to anger, then I think the Christian thing to do is, as much as it depends on us, do not be another source of that anger for them. Make things right with people. I almost used an example in the sermon. I didn't end up using it of, I have some friends that work in food service. Yeah. And they said that the worst day to work at a restaurant is Sunday afternoon, because that's when everybody's leaving church and they all go to the restaurant and they're really angry and they're really not appreciative, and they don't tip, and it's just like, and it's like well known. You can ask people who work in the restaurant industry. The worst shifts to work are those Sunday after church shifts, because
part of it's they're hangry, like hungry, angry, I was thinking about that, and just like the fact of the matter is like they've been in something for 3 hours without ever having been fed, and it's like, I know a lot of people that just get angry because they are because they're hungry.
Yeah, and hunger though even like, I think part of the reason fasting and a lot of those other kinds of things are so important in the Bible is because like even hunger shouldn't be an excuse to sin and different things like that. So you can't get away with it even if you're hangry. I'm not letting you get off the hook here. I just think that that's a horrible representation of Christ. It would be awesome if the opposite was true. If we were just people of peace in general. I've used this example a couple times, but there's the famous passage where Paul talks about the armor of is it the armor of God?
It's the armor of God.
I was like, what was the qualifier?
You second guessed yourself. You knew.
The armor of God. And there's all this, breastplate of righteousness, the
shield of
faith, and all this kind of stuff. I had never noticed. There's one piece of the armor that has a kind of an extra qualifier to it, which is the like shoes part, the feet part.
Shoes of the gospel of peace.
Yeah, shoes fitted with the readiness that comes for the gospel of peace. And most of the time when the gospel is brought up, it's just kind of like a noun. There's no adjective. There's no qualifier with the gospel. It's just the gospel. It's the good news. And I love how in this passage, it's specifically the gospel of peace. And that sort of peace and wholeness that is kind of represented, I think, should be central to the gospel. So I always try to make it my effort as much as possible. that's kind of why I ended the sermon the way I did a couple weeks ago. I want Christians to be known as people of peace, not as people that make other people angry, or as people that are super angry themselves.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, I think that's awesome. I think we're out of time, right?
All right, yeah. We've, it's like I said, it's kind of a controversial thing. We're going to be dealing with an even more controversial one this Sunday. I'm not exactly looking forward to it, but this Sunday we're going to be dealing with the follow-ups to this passage.
I will say that if anybody's reading ahead, you know what topic we're about to talk about. But as a single person, I've had amazing conversations with Nick about this topic. So I think that this is going to be a great sermon. I think he's going to knock it out of the park. It will be different than you are expecting. I know, like, I've had the conversation with him before. This is before he preaches it. So I know it's gonna be different, but I think it's going to offer a lot of people a lot of help. It did me. And so, yeah.
I'm glad. Yeah. So there's your teaser. You got to tune in this Sunday. 7 p.m. There's no Super Bowl going on this Sunday, so hopefully we'll see y'all tuning in live with us. And we will be dealing with another controversial passage of Jesus. But as with all of these passages, as is general with the law of Christ, I think the more we learn it, the more life it brings. And that is something that I'm super stoked on the more I learn about it. So hopefully you'll find that too. We'll see you this Sunday or next week for the following deep dive.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, everybody.